I would like to announce that our next online session will also be about AI. So mark your calendars for Friday, April 21st at the same time. The topic is going to be using AI tools for creative process. So we hope you can join us at that one as well. And to make sure you reserve a seat, please subscribe to the EMCoP mailing list, which is emcop.ca, and it's going to be posted in the chat. The final thing I want to mention is a reminder, if you want to ask a question when it comes time around 4 o'clock to ask questions of the panelists, please make sure you put your question into the Q&A portion. The chat section is just for side conversations. So those of us who are moderating will not be checking the chat at all. We'll just be looking at the Q&A portion. Okay, so thanks again for being here, and I turn it over to Saeed.
Thank you, Lolita. My name is Saeed Dianatkar, and I lead UBC Studios and Emerging Media Lab at UBC. The Emerging Media Lab is an initiative at the University of BC in Vancouver, which provides an experimental space where faculty, students, and staff from all disciplines collaborate with industry and the community. Its mission is to evolve learning by creating new tools and techniques using emerging media and technologies. If you're interested, please visit EML's website, which will be in chat in a moment, and see what EML has been doing over the last 5-6 years. Today's session is part of an ongoing series of meetups under the Emerging Media Community of Practice, as we call it, EMCoP. Emerging Media Community of Practice is a collaborative group of researchers, developers, designers, and educators who are committed to building a community focused on development of emerging technologies for human, social, and environmental good. EMCoP was initiated originally at UBC through the Emerging Media Lab over 5 years ago, but over time, it has become a hub for exchanging ideas and collaboration among universities, industry, and community members across Canada. It is my pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Patrick Pennefather, who will be moderating today's conversation. Patrick is a dedicated educator and a mentor in the field of emerging technology pipelines with a passion for inspiring the next generation of tech professionals. Patrick has a role as an assistant professor in film and theater at UBC, and also a faculty in residence at the Emerging Media Lab. According to himself, Patrick is not an expert in using generative AI, although I think otherwise, but has facilitated prototyping to support students on their development journeys. He brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to the classroom, which is articulated in his recently published book, Mentoring Digital Media Projects. Patrick is also publishing a new book soon on the subject of generative AI. That's why I think he is an expert, and how it supports the creative process. To you, Patrick.
Thank you, Saeed, and thank you, Lolita, and thank you to everyone joining us today for what will be a session that talks about how AI is revolutionizing education. Now, if that sounds familiar, especially to our panelists, to David, to Stephen, to Yuta, who I'm very honored to be having a conversation with today, it's because that type of association with technology and the word revolution has been around for a long time. We can go back to when it probably was first quoted in a newspaper back to Edison, talking about the moving picture as being a revolutionary aspect that will dramatically change the face of education. That's not the precise quote, I'm paraphrasing, but you get the picture. So today we are going to talk about that revolution, that is the calculate. No, it's the no, it's wicked. No. It's AI, and specifically generative AI, and specifically generative AI that is called Generative Pre-trained Transformer. Doesn't it sound better and more epic when we stop making it an acronym, ChatGPT? I know it's so easy to say, but Generative Pre-trained Transformer. Wow, that's awesome. Now, along with that word transformer, what I would ask all of you today is to consider transforming your perspective as to your own optimism or pessimism or combination spectrum in between on the use of not just ChatGPT, but other generative AI that are really coming to the forefront in our existence right now, and not just in education. We will focus and attempt to focus our conversation on education. But if you're like me, then anyone can learn. All of us are learning. We're all lifelong learnings inside of higher education, higher or post-secondary or beyond that. So I wanted to encourage all of you to consider shifting your perspective throughout this presentation and this conversation that we will all have. And who is the we that we will all have? Well, first of all, I wanted to acknowledge the dedication and commitment that one of our panelists who is unable to join us today had, and that is Dr. Farhad Dastoor, who's also a close friend. He's at KPU as a professor and part of KPU's virtual reality lab. He sends his regrets for not being able to join today. Who is here are three outstanding scholars and creators and thinkers that I'm so honored to be with today. And having read up on some of them whom I know less of, I'm even more excited. So first is Professor Jutta Treviranus from OCAD University in the Faculty of Design and Graduate Studies. And Jutta is the director of the Inclusive Design Research Center, IDRC, and professor in the Faculty of Design at OCAD University in Toronto. I'm going to give just a brief synopsis of the three panelists and ask them to talk a little bit more about themselves and the work they do and how that might relate or not to AI. Professor Stephen Murgatroyd also joins us from University of Alberta in the Faculty of Education, who is adjunct there. And Stephen has been blogging. Yeah, I lifted that from some random bio of yours, Stephen, since 2005. If you don't know what blogging is, you can ask Stephen. Many of his blogs have found their way into newspapers across Canada, including the Edmonton Journal, Vancouver Sun, the Montreal Gazette, Toronto Star, and other high circulation papers. His columns also appear frequently on Troy Media and the Calgary Beacon. Stephen is a member of the Canadian Association of Journalists, so very honored to be with you here today, Stephen, as well. And lastly, David Clement, who I've known for a while, and I've known who is active in this space. And by this space, I don't just mean generative AI, but in the space of artificial intelligence and machine learning and machine intelligence, as David will probably attest to when he speaks. And quoting from the Medium article in which, yes, I reread your work on Medium, independent researcher, serial tech and new media entrepreneur, futurist, technical philosopher, which I love, constantly evolving technologist and author. So here are my three panelists. Let me start with Jutta to tell us a little bit about herself, the work she does, and why she thinks she's here today, maybe. Jutta.
Sure.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, actually, I'm still wondering why I'm here. But, with respect to AI and education, the topic today, ChatGPT, but also just general AI, I'm not worried about what most of the chatter is about at the moment, or what most educators are worried about. I'm actually worried about how AI is applied to make our current educational models more effective, efficient, accurate, and consistent. My general concern is with the impact of statistical reasoning and predictive analytics on people who are outliers or individuals who are significantly different from the norm. I worry about the amplification, acceleration and automation of past views and disparity through AI. And a large part of my professional and personal community are people, are disabled people who are at the outer edges of the normal distribution. And unlike other minority groups, hugely different from each other. They're at the wrong end of the optimization formula. AI is getting better and better at discriminating against them. And as far as the current tizzy about ChatGPT and its lookalikes and the impact on the quality of education, I say if we need to police education, we're doing something wrong. If a machine can do what we are teaching our students to do, we are teaching our students to be machines, and we're turning our students into machines that can be replaced by more powerful machines. My goal as an educator is to foster students that have unique human skills and perspectives that will not be replaced by machines. I wish to cultivate adaptation, critical thinking, and collaboration. And we've had a bit of discussion about cheat detection tools and what might work and what might not work. But I see cheat detection tools as an exercise in challenging students to become better cheaters. And I don't mind the exercise, but I think we can challenge students in better ways. For example, I want my students to hone their ability to detect inauthentic productions. As an educator, I want to support and foster self-directed, self-motivated, lifelong learners. You mentioned lifelong learners, but I mean, we talk about terminal degrees within education at the moment. I don't think we have that view of lifelong learning. I don't want conforming students that become skilled at taking tests and meeting imposed expectations.
Nice.
Actually, I'm wondering, did you just want an introduction, or did you want at this point, or did you want my précis, my 5-minute précis that you were expecting?
I love it. I think that we were pretty open, so I'm not going to cut you off until you have 1 minute and 45 seconds left. No, I'm not going to automate that. So please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the 5-minute introduction to my position that you asked, right? Yeah. Okay. So to continue on that 5-minute précis of where I'm coming from. If my students use ChatGPT rather than producing content themselves, I'm fine with that. I'll make them aware of that they're losing out on the learning experience, or I'll acknowledge that I've asked them to do something that doesn't optimize their learning. They need to set and meet their own expectations, not mine. My experience is that students set a much higher expectations for themselves than I can ever do. And I want to actually encourage the students to differentiate themselves and weave their complementary skills with their peers, not compete on a single hierarchical scale, which is, of course, what ChatGPT and other systems are actually threatening at the moment. Our grading systems are ways of evaluating students. I don't want students to view someone else's loss as their win or someone else's win as their loss. And I fear that we're creating in our education system a fragmented monoculture. The generative models have helped to surface bad pedagogy or andragogy, I guess, in post-secondary education. It also makes manifest the flaws in our educational thinking or in academia. Actually, to use an analogy within complexity theory, within academia, I see ChatGPT and these generative models as an interruption of our current hill climbing, a learning moment of sorts. And what do I mean by that? In complexity theory, there is this theory of local and global optima. For those who aren't familiar with the theory of hill climbing, think of our collective human journey into the unknown future as navigating a complex, unpredictable, changing terrain, mountains and valleys, and that's trotted by fog because, of course, we can't predict the future. We need to find the highest point in this terrain to survive and thrive. Think of it as escaping from a rising water level, perhaps. To survive as a species, we need to find a generous high place that has room for the huge diversity that we are as a human race. Unfortunately, we're stuck on a small, steep, spiky mountain. In our attempt to get to the top of this small mountain, we're eroding the slope, making it harder for people to climb out of danger and destroying everything we need to survive in the long term. Because the hill is steep and the space is scarce, we think we need to compete. And our academia and our grading systems and the way that we value education is helping with that. The popular and respected message is that safety and success is to go up higher. We're told that to succeed, we need to do what we've been doing more effectively, efficiently, accurately, and consistently. And we design our machines and our education to climb up the hill faster and more competitively. And this tragedy, as I see it, is that within the same terrain, there is this large, generous mountain or global optima that could fit all of us and won't be submerged. However, to get to it, we need to reverse direction and go against much of what we've been taught. All the formula we think will lead to our success within academia and within other areas. And to do that, we actually need to undo or reverse much of what we've been doing. One of the things that I think we are doing in academia is epistemicide. We're killing off ways of knowing by valorizing and optimizing a certain way of knowing. We need to listen to the people that, in fact, have been occupying the unexplored knowledge terrain that we have been discouraging, etc. Academia needs to find out how to find the global optima rather than a way to hill climb a local optima that is better suited to machines with greater academic rigor. We should be complementing each other's knowledge and skills, and we should create machines that complement rather than replace our strengths. And we have an opportunity here to stop the epistemicide or killing off of ways of knowing it and explore the richness of the knowledge terrain more fully. So I'm not sure if I share some of the opinions of our other panelists, but that's
okay.
My position at the moment.
Thank you so much, Yuta. That's great. That's a great bio. I like that. It's like a bio, but
is that
extended, augmented, but no, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to flip over to Stephen. Putting you on the spot next.
Sure. So my history is of disruption. I'm the old person on the panel here. I'm in my early 70s. Started teaching in 1972 at the Open University in the UK, and then moved to Athabasca. So two institutions that have no admission requirements for undergraduate degrees, attracts mainly adult learners, and both institutions had to be really innovative to stay ahead of the game. My claim to fame is that I created the world's first fully online MBA program in 1993-94, which was a ridiculously stupid thing to do, given what the internet was like at that time. In 2000, I created some of the world's first micro-learning and micro-credentials through Middlesex Polytechnic in partnership with a number of companies, including Marks and Spencer's and the Hudson's Bay. So I've been a kind of pioneer of technology-enabled, open access, adult lifelong learning work all of my career. And I still teach now. I still teach on the MBA. And I'm requiring my graduate students in the MBA to use ChatGPT. It's not an option. They have to. Several reasons for this. One is I'm teaching on an executive MBA. So I need to expose these business leaders and these management people to the potential positive and negative aspects of AI. And I'm using it in very specific ways to encourage them to create more critical, reflective writing and to find their authentic voice. Mm-hmm. One of the problems with ChatGPT is it's excruciatingly dull. And so, I tried to get it to tell me a load of jokes the other day, and they were dreadful. I mean, bring back George Carlin, please. So I think we could be using it and leveraging it for critical thinking, for reflective review, for exploring boundaries, expanding the knowledge of students. So one of the things it can do is draw your attention to information you weren't fully aware of. However, I need them to audit their use of ChatGPT. So I'm asking them to show me what they've done with the output. Show me what Chat produced, show me what you did with it, and then give me your reflections on what you've learned about your own skills and your own capabilities from that.
Nice.
Now, just to respond to some of the observations already made, I think that the other opportunity that ChatGPT and this whole generation of AI tools, of which this is just one, there's a whole catalog of over 150 emerging technologies here that will have an impact on our work. I think it's terrific. I haven't set an exam since, I don't know, the Battle of Hastings. The notion of an exam is one of these ridiculous pantomimes we engage in because it's cheap and efficient. And it's not a really good way for learning or for feedback. And so I haven't set an exam for 30 years. In my courses, I use self-assessment and peer review, project-based learnings, peer assessment through project work, external assessment from the project owners for companies we might be working with. I don't do very much summative assessment. Most of mine is formative assessment. The university occasionally asks me to give people a grade, so I ask students what grade they think they've deserved. And then I give them feedback on whether I think that's right or not. So what's interesting about that is almost nobody thinks they're worth an A+, right? Everybody gives themselves an A-, an A-, or in some cases a B++. This is still the University of Alberta's antiquated grading system, by the way. They haven't understood metrics and the metric system, but it is Alberta. So we're a bit behind the rest of the known universe. By the way, one of the things ChatGPT doesn't understand is Alberta politics. Mind you, nobody else here does either. So that's absolutely fine. So I think that this has triggered a fantastic conversation about the renaissance in assessment and this renaissance in our understanding of learning and the process of engaging in learning. I'm asking my students to dance with robots, but to be in charge of the dancing steps and to become more authentic as a learner because of their interaction with AI. And so to some extent, I mean, I think the two of us that have spoken so far are not saying different things. I'm just saying it a bit more Yorkshire-like, which is, blunt. And so I think there's a real opportunity at this moment to have a better conversation about teaching and learning, about assessment, and about building the authenticity of learners as citizens and as contributors to social impact and environmental impact and those kind of things. So that's where I am at the moment. And I do realize the limitations of all this. And I was reading some really interesting stuff from health educators about the legal liability of health workers using ChatGPT either for diagnostics or for treatment pathways. Who's legally liable then for the consequences of using that kind of material? So there's some fantastic, rich political, social, legal, economic, academic issues here. But we have to start using this moment as an opportunity for a different conversation.
Thank you. Nicely said and framed. Thanks so much, Stephen. And David, hi. I would unmute you, but I don't have that power. I was trying to look for David's unmute button. I still don't have it.
There we go.
There we
Sorry
go.
about that.
All good.
Yeah, so I have a kind of I'll go off script in a minute, but I'll just stay on script for a moment here. Hi, I'm David Clement. I'm a research and developer working at the intersection of immersive technologies, multi-agent simulation, cognitive science, AI, and generative systems. And my usual way of working is to work with in collaboration with a group of others. And most of the people I work with are university professors. So I'll just kind of give you a quick introduction to some of the things I've been working on. This last SIGGRAPH here in Vancouver, I helped the team from Simon Fraser's iSpace Lab, Bernard Rieke and his collaborators, as well as a company called GeoSim, And we produced a system that allowed you to fly around virtual Vancouver, which is, I think Vancouver is the only model to be fully modeled down to 5 centimeters accuracy. So it's a very large virtual model, and you can basically just fly around the model just by leaning. We will actually be demonstrating this at an ECOP meeting coming up on, I believe it's March 2nd. I could be wrong on that one, but check with the EMCoP's site, and if you'd like to try that experience, we will be sharing it with everyone. I also worked on a project in collaboration with Human Studio, which is an architectural firm here in town, and UBC. Liz Dunn and her work in the Happiness Lab and so on. And we developed a system called Fluid, and Fluid is a multi-agent simulator. I'll give you a quick visual of it just so you can see what it looks like. 1 second. That's this one here. So I'll show on the screen. Yeah, so Fluid is a tool that allows architects to model or generate, if you will, potential designs for different buildings. And we can then assess, sorry, I'll just mute that. How do I mute it? Well, maybe, anyway, I can't mute it, so I'll just let it run. So just to summarize very briefly, the architects can create a wide range of different architectural models, and then we can assess those models in silico to see how much sociability is likely to evolve in that particular space. And that way we can actually design buildings that promote sociability and promote a much more social environment. We've done extensive work on assessing the sociability of the student housing at UBC. We've also done an assessment of there's a new building going in at UBC, which is an interdisciplinary building where we're trying to get different disciplines to actually share information between each other. And that system was also developed on top of Fluid. So that is one of the things I've been quite focused on. And then, as well as that, I've also been working on a very large digital twin out at Vancouver Airport, and I'll just run that in the background so you can see what that looks like. Just 1 second. And, so this is the virtual Vancouver model, and sorry, this is the YVR model. So this is, I believe, the world's most detailed digital twin. We've modeled about 40 square kilometers down to about 1 centimeter of accuracy. So this is a very, very large virtual model. And I've been working with GeoSim for many years on these gigantic models. And I've also been working with a couple of collaborators on that's Professor Rob Neal and Dr. Payam Musavi on the Philosophy and AI Reading Group, which we've been running for many years. And one of the things that we've been talking about of late is the impact of generative systems on education. And so Rob Neal and I have been having an ongoing discussion for quite some time now. He is in the School of Business in the University of Indiana, and their MBA program needs to be completely overhauled. And so I'm sure he's very interested in what Stephen was saying earlier. So just to kind of round out and respond to what the others have been saying, I have been studying this material now for many years, and AI specifically for over a decade now. And one of the things that I've been looking at personally in great detail is essentially the reverse question, which is what can AI teach us? So one of the things I've been trying to do is to take the work that's going on in the literature and trying to project that back into the human experience, and to see if we can use models that are proving to be successful in machine learning, like meta learning, and bring those back into the human realm and basically try and create collaborative systems where humans and AI can exchange information and knowledge in a very human and an embodied fashion. So I'll stop there.
Okay, great. Well, I look forward to going more into that, but thank you so much, David. And it's great to see those projects and really want to experience the YVR one. So I'll set that up with you at some other time. So, wow. So we've already had our first offers from our panel, which is going to make my life easier, given the discussions that are going to follow. As a small break to this, I wanted to introduce Daniel, who is also acting as ChatGPT's curator for today. And we're just going to break this up while I pose an opening question to our panelists. And Daniel's going to make us all go to ChatGPT, those who can, and put in the precise same prompt and see what results transpire, which we are inviting you to share in the chat, just as a small breakup activity. So here we go. What do we have as our prompt? Oh boy. Okay, well, good luck, everybody. Tell a funny joke about AI in higher education. I look forward to hearing those responses, reading them, I should say, shortly. And so to our panelists. So it's interesting because we did prepare, or I did, a fairly structured, here's a first round question, centered around the pros or affordances of the technology and how it's being used in higher ed and how it's supporting learning. And I think where we can actually get a bit more specific, given the responses and the positions that were already heard today, is how do you think we can benefit, and what are the benefits of using ChatGPT specifically? Let's zone in there for a sec, but we can move beyond that if you want. But at least it's a starting place. So are there benefits? What are those benefits? Can you identify some use cases, as some individuals in the chat have done as well? And I think the ChatGPT has been active in trying to respond and probably not giving completely satisfying responses, not sure. But there it is. What are the pros? What are the advantages towards learning? And we've already heard that highlighted from Stephen. So I think what I'll do, Stephen, is I'll have you start, since you have been, you made those initial offers, and maybe you can expand on a little bit of that and how the responses have been from your students as well. Maybe we can expand there too.
So one of the examples of the work I've asked them to do is to write a piece of material that they need for their learning, submit it to ChatGPT with the instruction, improve on this text, and then to look at what Chat produces. So we have the original student-written piece, the ChatGPT piece, and then I asked them to answer two questions. What is showing on ChatGPT that's new to you? And then reflect on this process. What are you learning about your own writing and your producing of an authentic voice? Two things have happened so far. One is Chat is dreadful after about the third paragraph. And so, what I've learned is don't give it 5 paragraphs because it just gets more and more dull. And the second thing is what's been referred to in the literature as hallucination, which is paragraphs that look terrifically good, but are actually bullshit, which is a technical term, meaning not strictly true. So my students are quite amazed with some of the questions I'm asking, which sometimes are quite technical, like explain why Canada's productivity has been flat since 1992. They have to write something. Chat produces a more detailed response from their writing, and they have to critically reflect on what that means for them. I think that's a kind of process that helps them think about how to improve their writing, but also how to improve their research skills. And that's the second thing I'm asking them to do. In the first 3 weeks of this course, a team that's never met before have to get ready to do a presentation to an industry sector about what that industry needs to do to prepare itself for 2030. So let's imagine it's forestry, and we've got some forestry industry sector leaders coming in, and our students have to present. So the research capabilities of chat in relation to some of the technical side of that, like this, the scale of mountain pine beetle disease in over time, is far faster and better than any other kind of resource you can get at. But you have to check accuracy. You have to check the veracity of that material. And chat is awful at referencing, and it's a black box, so we've no idea what sources it's using. But there are massive constraints. Bias, Jutta has raised bias. Where's the indigenous voice? You ask chat to do something in Cree or Welsh, which is my other language, not very helpful here in Alberta, the Welsh, except it comes in useful occasionally when our premier is on television. So I can swear at her in Welsh, and only my wife knows what I'm talking about. But I think there are some real potential uses, and I'm still experimenting, and my students are helping me think about what else we could be doing with this tool.
That's great.
But I'm seeing it as a requirement for my MBA students to be able to dance with robots. I think that's the kind of big message.
Yeah, and just a quick follow-up, has there been reflection on that particular activity that you engage them with? How do they feel about these experiments?
I think some of them, well, one of the other things I would say is that just because they're graduate students doesn't mean to say they're literate. So literacy is a massive problem in the undergraduate and graduate student population. 40% of our workforce in Canada has low levels of literacy on the OECD scales, 1 and 2 versus 3, 4, and 5. So I'm improving some of their writing just by asking them to do this activity. But I think for the students who are really good at writing, what shocks them is how their writing can be improved by subtle language changes and by subtle uses of better grammar. And so I think that they're learning how to hone their writing style. I've written and published 42 books now. It's called addiction. That's my problem. I have to write.
You can have
every
your
day.
own corpus and go to chatbase.io.
I do. That's how I get up every morning. I have a corpus. Oh, sorry, that's a different conversation. But I think that the kind of ability to have a kind of almost self-managed writing clinic is a powerful tool in itself. And all of us who teach graduate students will tell you, some of them just can't write.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you. Well, let's open this up. David, what are your thoughts? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think it's an emerging medium. So I think that it's a new way for us to interact with computers that we've never quite had before. And I think that that's very interesting, especially from a sociability point of view. Like, is ChatGPT good enough to assuage some of the social problems with learning where people feel alienated or left out of the learning process? Does this give them a kind of a friendly voice that they can work with that overcomes some of the bias that they encounter in the university setting? There's a lot of psychological research on this where people who are very uncomfortable giving details of traumatic situations are much more comfortable chatting with robots in doing that. So I think that that's a very powerful thing. I think it democratizes knowledge. I think that it essentially expands the reach of knowledge to a far greater audience than it's ever had before, because you can caveat the answers that it gives you with some kind of framing statement, like to a person who, has a high school education or is a plumber or something like that. You can actually reasonably respond to you and actually allow you access to information that otherwise would be absolutely impenetrable to you. So I see that as being a very, very positive outcome of this, which it greatly increases the reach of knowledge in society. And it really cuts through as far as it goes because of the language that it produces. Yes, we need to do better jobs with you know, the other languages and the smaller cultures for certain. But I really think that that's a benefit. I think that it streamlines the knowledge discovery process dramatically. And I personally have changed the way I acquire knowledge now because of the way that I can interact with ChatGPT. So there's these new patterns of learning and this new kind of ways of using this technology, which are emerging as we speak. And more controversially, I think that this partially addresses the kind of the end of truth, as it were, because this giant corpus of knowledge essentially offers as good as it gets, but it'll get better over time. A kind of what I would call a normative truth, which is you can ask an independent, you know, non-aligned agent to give you information, and as long as that non-alignment is managed well, I think that it really is a kind of truth, if you will. It's a kind of common truth, at least, that if you ask it and I ask it, we get a similar answer. And so our view of the world is normative. To speak back to Jutta's point about diversity, this does crush diversity. I'm not saying it doesn't, because we're all being pulled back to a normative view. So it's both a blessing and a curse. But they're the main points. They're the main positive points that I see it having at this time. So I'll hand it over to Jutta.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and certainly in terms of the stats, which I couldn't find by asking ChatGPT directly, by the way, which was, how large is your corpus? How many gigabytes? So I found out that it's probably around 570 to 590, but those were stats last week. And I'm not sure if how quickly that's going to shift or change, but definitely and again, my stats are last week and that could have changed. It is considered to be the largest language, natural language machine learning model that is out there currently. And so interesting take. And Jutta, I'm going to leave you with, before we go into the some of the other challenges and dilemmas that you brought up, maybe let's just on this round focus on what it can afford for individuals. Okay. And yeah.
So similar to Stephen, I use the same sorts of exercises with my students. I mean, I see it as a great way to hone bullshit detection in the students. So editing, figuring out what's missing, where the inaccuracies are. And I like that exercise of starting with a student writing and then continuing with it. The advantage I've seen of these emerging systems is that it actually makes manifest a lot of the things that were seen as soft science, and they come into the view of hard scientists. And some of the work that I've been doing with AI is exploring alternative ways of going. So at the moment, the systems are largely using data exploitation. And so I've been looking at data exploration instead. One very, very simplistic way in which we've done this, take a word cloud, which is a good illustration of how AI systems currently work. Obviously, it's not an AI system, but it's using the same sort of formula where the words that are most common go to the center, they increase in size. We've created an inverted word cloud where rather than having the most common words grow in size and go to the center, it's actually the novel words that gain your attention. And so we're counteracting that echo chamber. We've in selection systems, we're looking at how to find how to explore, so integrate more and greater diversity. And then I've been playing with things like what I call my lawnmower of justice, which is basically taking the Gaussian curve, which is what's used to arrive at the normative response or the optimal response within a system, and cutting off all data points beyond a certain repeat. And then the learning model needs to attend to a far greater diversity of requirements. The one thing to know about people who tend to be outliers is they have the opportunity to have the greatest benefit from these systems, but also the greatest harms. And so many of the really compelling and groundbreaking uses of the AI systems are actually used by someone who, or people with disabilities, whether it's text to speech, speech to text, pattern recognition, etc. So it has a huge influence on people's lives. However, if for whatever reason you are not also dealing with the average or the typical, then you're worse off. So struggling learners and instructional tutors, if your learning approach or where you how you optimally learn is very different from other students, then while you may need an instructional tutor more, it will be harder and harder for you to use. If your utterances are very different from the norm, it's harder to use. If you live in an environment that is not like the environment that the system is trained on in terms of recognition, then it's going to be harder to use. So it's increasing that disparity, and it's which I think is a huge threat. So how do we think about the system in such a way that we can reverse that? So it's actually reducing the disparity rather than increasing the disparity. And as I mentioned right at the beginning, I think this is bringing those challenges, which previously were seen as this sort of fuzzy stuff that soft scientists worried about but was not real, into the realm of hard sciences and into a scope where people actually are starting to be more concerned about it.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you. And I love your provocation with how do we reduce that, and that can be a prompt for the development teams of these different AI. And I think I think it's a valuable and a critical but also difficult challenge. But I think that our exposure to this tool internationally and from different perspectives of uses has drawn that to our attention. And much of what you said earlier as well, in terms of bringing things to the fore, which is what's happening, is a positive thing in a way for us to at least have to contend with them. And maybe there were things we did not want to deal with in the past that are suddenly, I don't know, manifesting more rapidly. So speaking of use cases,
and mistakes are actually wonderful learning moments.
Yeah.
I think it allows us to reassess our value placed on failure and mistakes. Mistakes are not deterministic. Failure is not deterministic. Here's an opportunity to rethink what we're doing.
Yeah, thank you. And so everyone, audience, use cases, please share them. I'm sure many people have been exploring and experimenting. So what are some of the use cases that you have engaged in? And please share those in the chat while we shift directions a little bit to the challenges of ChatGPT in the classroom, and maybe with a goal of bringing those things to the surface. What are some lessons that we are learning from these interactions, and how might we, as a community, make those recommendations for future development. So that was a long prompt. I probably wouldn't get a really good response if I did that in Stable Diffusion, but who knows? David, we're going to start with you, seeing that you are developing many of these systems and beyond ChatGPT, I should add. And does it come down to algorithms? Is one question I had. And I know that might be a broad question to ask. I know that we saw through interactions with Bing and a colleague of my new colleague of mine, Suki, who might be on this call, mentioned a fantastic thought, which was it was interesting to see it go off the rails. Wasn't it though? But man, did it go off the rails. So what are we learning from that? Is that a dangerous thing, or is it actually bring transparently to the surface the biases of the developers and the development team, and the types of algorithms that they're developing? What are they pre-programming to write at the end of paragraphs beyond in conclusion, comma? So, wow, that was a longer prompt, David. Just cut me off. I'll just keep talking.
Well, I'm not quite sure what the question is, but I'll give it a go. So there's two parts to ChatGPT, as I understand it. There is the actual underlying GPT-3 model, which is the giant language model that they've trained back in 2021, I think it was. And then there's this thing called the reward model. And the reward model is this thing whereby I believe it's called reinforcement learning with under human supervision or human feedback, I think. Human feedback, yeah. And really what's going on here is that the people at OpenAI had a bunch of people, look at two responses and say, which of these two responses would you expect to see, which is more like, which one is better for you as a response to this question? And they pick that, and then they'd use that as a training set, and so on. So really the biases so there's two sources of bias. There's the bias of the actual content on the internet, which is human generated. And there's also the bias of the actual reward model, which is the people who they're asking for preferences about what is a good response and what is not a good response. And I'm deeply worried more about the second than the first. Yeah. So as a technical approach to dealing with some of the issues that Jutta has kind of surfaced, perhaps you should be able to select the reward model that's appropriate for you, right? So if you have particular views, or if you have a particular perspective, potentially we could have a selection of different filters that we can apply to the underlying corpus that manifested in different ways. And this might be a political bias, this might be an academic bias, it might even just be a community of practice bias. But these reward models don't need to be super duper dense. You can basically start with a reward model that's already there, and then layer on your own essential set of responses on top of that. So I could potentially see a great diversification in the ChatGPT system, whereby you can select different basically cohorts of or different reward models, if you will, that would allow you to find answers that fit with your worldview and your political and social biases. So perhaps that's an extension point. I don't think there's anyone at OpenAI or ChatGPT who's maliciously trying to inject this stuff. I think a lot of this stuff is essentially intrinsic. So I don't think there's any kind of evil going on behind the scene, if you will. But we can't help it, right? Because when you give people preferences, those biases essentially can migrate into the data set itself. But I don't think there's anything potentially bad about the algorithm. It's very general. And really, the biases that we're seeing are actually coming from us. So I don't know if that answers your question. But...
Yeah, no, I think it's good to talk about that and get Stephen and Yuta's thoughts on it as well, especially with how a lot of the generative adversarial networks are working. And for those who don't know about it, look up GAN, G-A-N, for a primer on that. And it is fascinating because it's basically a debate and a moderator, and it's trying to figure out, well, what is the best output based on the prompt that is received. That's a really poor synopsis. But in any case, I just wanted to talk about that a little bit because it is interesting. Even the language of reward is interesting, built into these systems and how they're thought about and conceived. I don't know if Stephen, you were jumping in, or Yuta. Maybe both at the same time. Okay.
There's a wonderful example of ChatGPT being asked to write a poem about Donald Trump. And Chat said, "Oh, no, I don't do political things." So then they asked it to write one about Joe Biden, and it did.
Mm.
And you say, "Oh, so Joe Biden's not political." Well, no, he's kind of senile, but so is Trump. So why choose one and not the other? There's a bias. And then we should also mention Bard, this disaster that Google launched in response to this, which is just full of all sorts of massive issues, which is ironic, really, given that their work in DeepMinds is pretty impressive work on things like medical diagnostics. So we're focusing on ChatGPT, but there is this other stuff that's out there that's not as good. Both are problematic, like Chat's problematic for all sorts of reasons, but some of the other ones are just dreadful.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about the best in class at the moment, and I think there's a lot of work to do to get it to the next level of performance. And we all need to be training it.
Mm. Do you think we're going to end up with our own language models and needing to customize those depending on our communities and our interests?
Well, I've just learned English because I'm from Yorkshire, so I've only just learned how to speak English.
Yuta.
Yeah, I actually, the notion of our own cushioning models, basically, and the recommender engines, and not providing any dissonant views or diverse views or things that might challenge us is actually quite scary, because that will further fragment and polarize people. So I think we need to encourage the unpopular or the more dissonant views, especially in our students, as opposed to serving up exactly the political views that we want or that we're comfortable with, or that people like us have. I think there is, though, to David's point, a really positive use of it, and that is to certainly within learning, to remove the difficulty in the tasks that are not about the actual learning itself. So customizing or personalizing the interface, the way that we get to the knowledge, as opposed to the learning and the knowledge. But that shouldn't be confused with the reduction of the perspectives that we see, or the views that we see, or the products or the experiences that we see. I think evil, like Hannah Arendt says, can be mundane and very subtle. I actually think that there is a lot of harm being done by the algorithm by virtue of how it is continuing. I mean, it is driving us towards a monoculture, that normative truth, and the offering, the easy offering of things that are exactly like what the average says, does, likes, is quite destructive, and maybe not evil, but I think it is harmful. I think we really need to re-examine that. And of course, it's not, I mean, AI is only doing what we've been doing in more efficient, accurate, and consistent ways. It's a power tool for something that we've been doing before. And so it behooves us to think about, well, wait a sec, where are we going with how we've done things? And how are we using this thing to, in fact, be much more reductionist by being more efficient and consistent and accurate? It questions how we value education, or how we evaluate learning, etc. And I appreciate that Stephen's not, I'm also an ungrader. I don't believe in grading or in ranking students on a single scale. I think that's quite, it isn't producing the type of education that we want. But it also throws in or mirrors to us, what are we doing when we make any decisions collectively? It's always majority rules. And so we need a much more rich and thoughtful view of what is democracy? How do we make decisions? How do we govern? How do we, how do we market? How do we decide what is priority, etc.? By virtue of making it so clear, the collision course that we're headed towards, and the fact that we're creating this monoculture with this tool, I think it gives us a moment to pause and to think about how will a monoculture survive if that's what we're creating, this normative view or of what people are.
Yeah, thank you. And that certainly, I think that certainly brings up that challenge with any machine learning model as well in terms of that. And I wanted to quickly, because of time, I wanted to quickly just turn slightly to Lalita, who's been hosting and prepping a question from our audience. And I just wanted to respond to one of the chats before that, Lalita, that came up from John. And Daniel responded from John Andrews there in the chat. And absolutely, there have been workarounds to figure out the code for ChatGPT. And in fact, where I found that was on TikTok. What? How did that even? Okay, anyway, but they do exist. So do some research, go to Reddit. Maybe you'll find your answers on some of these sites, Quora, that are exploring non-normative behaviors. So, Lalita.
Yes.
Hi, you're back. You can stay there. It's all good.
Thank you for those of you who are asking questions. It's wonderful to have some to choose from. And Reed Patterson, I quickly wanted to read out what you've written. We won't have all of it, but some of it. And this sort of ties into what Yuta was just talking about. He says, we currently have huge issues with the health of our information ecology as a society. So misinformation, attention economy, causing large problems for democracy. And so there are two questions I'd like to include here. With the advent of generative AI like ChatGPT and its upcoming integration with web searches, how do you see this changing our information ecology? And second, are there dangers in having this power to control the conversation concentrated in the hands of the few? And the example that he gives is Microsoft. Okay. So I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, should we ask Bing that question? See what kind of a response we get. Is there someone who's burning to address this? And Stephen, great. And I just wanted to thank you for that prompt. Fantastic, and so many large words. Like democracy, like which democracy, whose democracy, information ecology, which one are you referring to? So I just wanted to open that up as well, because there may not be singular definitions here. Stephen.
Well, I think the more worrying Microsoft decision that I understand they're on the edge of making is to integrate ChatGPT in Microsoft Word and PowerPoint and the whole Office suite, so that as you're writing, you get challenged to think differently about what it is you're saying. And I think that's even more dangerous than the search engine problem. But democracy is in peril, and democracy is in peril because of all sorts of reasons. One is the misinformation problem we have, and the other one is this tribalism that's now dominating our understanding of what politics looks like. So I'm old enough to remember when opposition parties and the government sat down together for beers and had long dinners and conversations, and then fought each other in the house and came out and had dinner together. And I was at many of those dinners when I was a political player. But now it's tribal, and now votes are tribal, and votes are based on tribal misinformation. And trying to shift mindsets with knowledge, information, and data no longer works very well. So the problems we're dealing with in our democracy go beyond information. They're about understanding, meaning, and purpose. And part of the work of educators, K to PhD, is to help people explore and understand their purpose and their authentic self. And as a psychologist, I'm okay now. I've got the tablets and everything. But as a psychologist who used to be working with distressed and complex families, I think the kind of systems breakdown that we're seeing in our democracies, in our communities, and in our interrelationships with people that we disagree with, will just be exacerbated by the use of some of these tools in the wrong way. All tools are helpful, but you can use a hammer to kill. So I think we have a responsibility as educators to help people see how these tools can help change the narrative, change the ecosystem, change collaborative dynamics, change communication patterns. If we're simply doing them to reinforce existing patterns, then we're not educators. We're just simply purveyors of corporate greed.
Interesting, the word pattern, then you brought that up, which I think is really relevant in terms of how many of these learning models work, looking for those patterns. And so interesting. So Utah and or David, did you want to extend that?
So, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a great question, and we've been looking at alternatives. So one of the things where we have been exploring is bottom up, what used to be called thick data systems. It's thick meaning that it's not data devoid of context or like immediate context. Creating a platform, cooperative platform data trusts, where a community get together and create, or the release of the information or the personal data happens with the consent and with the knowledge of the individuals that produce the data. Because I think part of the issue with these systems as well is the extractive nature of our data and the interpretation of the data that isn't no longer in our ownership, and we're not getting the value of it. So how do we change that? And we've been looking at small communities that are not represented within the normative data that is part of ChatGPT, that are poorly reflected within that, and how do we produce a system that, or even exploring how we can use transformation transfer learning to recalibrate these systems in such a way. But of course, the issue with these very, very large language models is that they take so much resource to actually create. They require so much power. They can only be created by very large, powerful, well-resourced companies. Can we reach a point at which the transfer can happen much more efficiently and effectively without having to push against the majority of the data that's there? So that this is there's some really large questions, and it does relate to, as Stephen was saying, our democracy and the threat of our democracy. Or the threat to our democracy of the tribalism and the cushioning and the personalization that is happening at the moment.
Thank you. And David, did you want to respond? Should we get Lalita with a new question?
I don't really have much to add.
Okay.
I think that the challenges that are faced by the very large language models are that they are out of the reach of smaller communities. And I think that you need a different technology stack, which is essentially based around few-shot or one-shot learning, which there are lots of very good systems that can do that. That would allow you to use, a small data set to produce something that would at least capture the essence of the position of that particular group. But these very large language models, by their very design and by their very nature, are normative. And so we might be able to create new reward models and essentially draw out different perspectives from that corpus. But I think that if you really want to try and create a knowledge base for a small community, then the techniques that you would need to use to do that would be quite different to the ones that are currently being applied, in my opinion, for what that's worth. But
I agree completely. We're actually finding that things like voice recognition of dysarthric speech or minority precarious languages works far better in the older systems than currently, because you're not fighting against the tide.
Right, and that tide is very, very large, but yes.
But but David, that's fantastic, because it does leave with more recommendation for future dev, and to really help guide different people where they can turn when they want to find alternatives. So I think that's important. It's important, and you called them one shot.
Few-shot, no, just basically small data models. Yeah, just basically you don't have a lot of examples, you don't have a giant corpus. So
I'm seeing more of those than ChatGPT. When you go to huggingface.co, for example, and you see the vast number of machine learning models there. If anyone wants to go there and check and be overwhelmed, but that's the majority of what I see, actually. How those are making it to the top of our attention span is a good question, right? Because ChatGPT is very much also taken over our media channels and the ones through which a lot of the information that we receive is conveyed. And so there's an interesting thing about that as well, in terms of would we be having this discussion about those smaller machine learning models, and should we have those discussions about them and use cases, and describe those use cases and share those use cases, so that we can better prepare ourselves as instructors and educators, and also our students, to know and to direct, hey, there's options, you should try this. That was my thought as well. Lalita, I think we have time for one more question. We'll have to finish at 4:50 because Lalita has an announcement, but yeah.
Okay, well, we'll go, the last one then will be from Tamine So. And the question is, what do you predict AI will be able to do that humans cannot accomplish? This is asking for predictions, I guess.
Wow, it's so much easier to say what I can't do right now. Are we gonna? Wow.
Yeah, so I can try and tackle this one a little bit. So the rate of academic progress in machine learning is beyond human already. I've received from a friend all of the videos for Europe's 2023, and if I watched them continuously 8 hours a day, it would only take me 3 months to watch them once, and that's just the presentations at one conference. So the rate of progress is unprecedented, and it is also literally beyond our comprehension, in a sense, in that nobody actually has the full picture anymore. And so we actually need these tools to summarize the research in order to make progress. So I think that I don't think AI is going to run away from us or anything, but I think that we really do need to spend a significant amount of our energy making sure that we can distill useful knowledge from this vast, this vast moving front of academic research in the area of machine learning. To answer the question directly, I don't know, because I can't grasp the literature. It is literally humanly impossible to do so in a kind of holistic sense. You can follow the superstars, if you will, or just Miller or a few other labs or something, and take your inferences for that. But we already face the problem that this is bigger than anyone can fit in their head. And so in the sense that what can AI do that humans can't, we're already there. I can't keep the entire text of the internet in my head available for recall in any sense. So these models are already well beyond human capability. And much of the work that's going on is essentially to try and distill some of that down to something we can actually fit in our head. So we're kind of already there, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I think one of the spaces that AI is showing huge impact is in medical diagnostics. So Google's DeepMind is replacing the doctor's work at the Moorfields Hospital in London, which is the leading ophthalmology clinic in Europe. And it's what they've been able to do is to rapidly diagnose eye disease in about 75 different categories of eye disease, better, more reliably and faster than teams of medical specialists who've been doing this all their lives. And you might think, oh, that's dangerous because we're going to displace these doctors. No, they can get to treatment faster. They can get to treat these patients in a fraction of the time it used to take while they were trying to work out whether it was A, B, or C. And so because this system is so reliable, the doctors welcome this with open arms. We're also seeing that with some cancers, and I think we'll see it with other forms of medical diagnostics over the next decade. But there is the Gartner hype cycle we should keep in mind here. And for education, I think we're at the top of the peak of expectations and sliding down the trough of disillusionment right now. But the productive side will come 2 or 3 years from now when we stop trying to become normative and become creative in how we're using these technologies to enable authentic and deep learning by our students.
Thank you. Jutta.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you're bringing up the medical uses, because one of the things that we found is with evidence-based medicine and with AI medical calculators and diagnostic tools, there is an increase in iatrogenic death and illness in people that are not like the average. So the further you deviate from the average, the more likely it is that the AI will guide you or misdiagnose you in such a way that it will cause that the actual treatment will cause death or illness. So yes, there are some really powerful uses of the AI. I mean, the AI can be seen as a power tool. It's doing things that, so a manual saw versus a fairly sizable power tool it's going to do things more effectively, efficiently, and consistently than any human can. But the way that it's doing it, a power tool can be also much more harmful and can do much more harm than a human can. So I think we need to consider how are we using this power tool and what are we using it for.
Thank you. Yeah, and the one thing that I can answer for myself, and as we lead to conclude this session, is what AI, especially text to image generation, does better than any human can right now is the uncanny valley. So look that up. It's fantastic. Just put in hands as a prompt in Stable Diffusion or others, and wow, better than I could ever do uncanny valley. These AI do extremely well, and that for me is the humorous aspect of it, of the question too, in terms of because there's always this dilemma of when will the AI replace the human, and you just need to look at what's in front of us now, and also reflect on the conversations that we have had here all together to understand that not anywhere soon, and that's good. There might be disagreement. I know that opens up a wormhole, but maybe that can be directed towards our next session that Lalita is going to come back and announce. But before that, thank you, Yuta. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, David, for joining us on what are challenging discussions right now. And thank you so much for offering insight today. And to everyone present, thank you so much as well for all that you shared in the chats and the provocations and the prompts. And thanks to the team today who has done a fantastic job. And that's everyone at the Emerging Media Lab, including UBC Studios. And off to you, Lalita.
Okay, yes, thank you so much for joining us. By the way, there was a lot of fascinating stuff happening in the chat, including Daniel, the responses that ChatGPT was giving to some of the questions, which it was difficult to sort of bring those over. So I know that our goal is to have the chat be available to everyone, but I first want to mention that the recording to this session will be available, and it will just go to the EMCoP website. So it's just simply EMCoP.ca, and by tomorrow it should be up there. You can watch this again. You can listen to what people were saying. And the next session, which once again is going to be using AI tools for creative process. So we'll be building off of what we did here, moving more into sort of visual and audio. That will be on Friday, April 21st. It will also be online. It'll be free. You sign up via Eventbrite, and from 3:30 till 5 Pacific Standard Time. So the best thing to do is just subscribe on the EMCoP website, and then you'll receive notifications about the upcoming events. So thank you to all of you viewers for coming. And I think we had, well over 270 people registered. So we look forward to seeing you in April, and thank you very much.